Hello?
You with us, Janet?
Yeah, it's me.
That's okay, I can slide down.
I think we're just about set. I'm bringing up the Zoom now.
There we go.
Thank you again, Bernie.
Okay, we're good.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this July 5th, 2022 meeting of the City Council Committees to order. We'll begin with just a couple of housekeeping reminders up at the top. This meeting is being recorded, so it can be live streamed on the city's YouTube channel. This is a good opportunity to silence your devices if you haven't done so already. And to the extent of which there will be public comment this evening, just a reminder that if you are making public comment, please come up to the podium, begin with your name and the street that you live on, and limit your comments to no longer than 3 minutes. Mr. Harris, can we begin with the roll call of members?
Yes, Madam Vice President.
Here.
Ms. Baker?
Here.
Mr. Flexty?
Here.
Ms. Gregg?
Here.
Ms. Diaz?
Here.
Ms. Walsh?
Here.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Thank you very much. We'll move for the approval of the June 6th, 2022 committee meeting minutes. I'll hear a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Are there any council comments on the minutes? Hearing none, Mr. Harris?
Mr. Arroyo?
Aye.
Ms. Baker?
Aye.
Mr. Flexty?
Aye.
Ms. Gregg?
Aye.
Ms. Diaz?
Aye.
And Ms. Walsh?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We'll open up committees with personnel. Councilor Calikst.
Thank you, Mrs. Vice President. So the Personnel Committee has on two items on the agenda for tonight. The first item is the nomination of Christopher Delfs for appointment to the Lancaster Industrial Development Authority for a term of 5 years, from July 12, 2022 to December 31st, 2026. And the other item that we have on the agenda for tonight is the nomination of Mr. Ted Darkus for reappointment to the Civil Service Board. That would be it, Mrs. Vice President.
Thank you. Your committee.
Okay. I believe that we have Mr. Chris Delf with us tonight. Would you please come forward? So thank you for being here tonight with us, and thank you for your willingness to serve, to continue serving. And would you please tell us some of your goals that you would like to accomplish during your term?
Good evening, councilors. Mayor Sirachi, thank you for the nomination to serve on the Lancaster Industrial Development Authority. Councilor Cleeks, if you don't mind, I'll just give a little bit of background first before I answer your question.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
I've been serving as the staff liaison and the secretary to the board over the last few years. The other LIDA board members have asked that I officially fill one of the seats moving ahead. One of the seats came open, and since I've been serving as this staff role, they thought that it would make good sense if I sat on the board as a voting member as well. LIDA is probably one of the lesser known authorities to the city council and to the public. It's somewhat unusual, the board, because it serves the county as a whole, not just the city proper. Just to give you a sense of what LIDA does, it assists in certain kinds of eligible economic development in Lancaster County. The authority primarily facilitates tax-free financing for nonprofit organizations and certain types of manufacturing projects. There's a set of eligibility criteria that projects must meet in order to receive consideration for financing. And due to the nature of the qualification requirements, the board typically only reviews a few projects each year, and we meet technically monthly, but it usually works out that it's only necessary to meet quarterly. So just wanted to give you a sense of what this authority does. I've had the opportunity to learn about it over the last few years, and appreciate that the work the members do on the authority. So that's a long way of getting back to your question, and that was about goals for the authority.
Yes, sir.
Really, I think the main thing that I would like to accomplish is, since I am aware in my position as Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, I have a good familiarity with the land development projects that are in the pipeline. I am in frequent communication with community organizations, real estate developers, et cetera. So if there is an opportunity that we could find or connect financing or cost-saving opportunities for these organizations, I'm in a good spot to be able to make that link.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from the member of the committee? Any questions from the council as a whole? Any comments from the public? All right, thank you, Mr. Grace. Good luck.
Thank you, sir.
And I also, you want me to have a motion? Yeah, okay. So now I want to make a motion to appoint Mr. Chris Delve for, excuse me. I want to make a motion to nominate Chris Delve for the appointment to the Lancaster Industrial Development Authority for a term of 5 years.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, I also believe that we have with us Mr. Ted Darkus. Oh, after.
We'll have to finalize our vote officially,
Oh, okay.
just to the committee. Just the committee. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. All in favors?
Aye,
I get it wrong.
to make it officially official.
Yes, sorry about that.
That's all right.
All right, so I also believe that we have Mr. Ted Darkus with us tonight. And I wanted to remind that Mr. Ted Darkus is a long-time public servant, and he was a city clerk. He preceded Mr. He was a former city council president. Oh, okay. He was a former city council president, and he was a former city councilor also. And he has served on the Convention Center Authority when the center opened. and he has served as the director of the Governor's Advisory Commission on the African American Affairs. He was also the former associate executive director of the Boys and Girls Club. Mr. Darkis, would you please come forward if you want to address council?
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight,
Thank you.
and thank you for your service.
Appreciate it, and thank you for inviting me to be reappointed. Hopefully that I've served the city well, and that I will continue to do the job that I've been asked by the mayor, who is the one that officially asked for the appointment. I confirm that I'd like to be reappointed again to the Civil Service Commission, which we do a very good job into certifying firemen and police officers through the process that they have to go through, testing to the physical activities they have to do, as well as interviews that they have to go through as far as whether they want to be a sergeant, captain, or lieutenant. And these are the things that the civil service does. And we meet as needed. Sometimes it's every month, and sometimes we will get a break and maybe meet every 3 or 4 months. So that's what we get. So it's pretty much a good process that I feel very important that citizens around the city take part in, and they get to see the process at work. Proud to be part of it.
Thank you. I believe that your experience will help you accomplish successfully, some of the issues that the board has and accomplish great things for the board. Thank you. Excuse me, is there any other questions or comments from the members of the committee?
Councilor Calixte, not a question for Mr. Darkis, so you can take your seat. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for serving in the city in the past and also staying with it in this capacity. It's really important to have folks with that depth of experience and knowledge helping others on boards, commissions, and authorities. And these are volunteer positions, and so it's important, and it's also quite heartwarming, actually, that folks want to volunteer their time to do things like this. It's incredibly important, and we couldn't do our work without folks like you. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council?
Councilor Calixte.
Please go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Darkis, for the work that you do for the city in the past and in the future. You've always been there for me when I've had questions about numerous things. So thank you so much for what you do.
Any other comments? Questions from the public? Okay, now I want to make a motion to nominate Mr. Ted Darkis to the Civil Service Board.
Second.
All in favors?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Calixte. We'll then move to the Community Planning Committee, and that is going to be Councilor Craig.
Thank you, Vice President. We have 2 things on the agenda this evening. One being Administration Resolution 55, amending 2022, amending the sewer control plan to include redevelopment of 210 and 250 College Avenue. The other Administration Resolution 57, 2022, adopting the Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan. And we'll start with Resolution 55, amending the sewer control plan to include redevelopment.
Good evening, councilors. Good evening, Mayor. So I was before you with this resolution at our last council meeting, and we realized that there was an error in this resolution, so we've since corrected that, and I'm back to present this once more. As it turned out, the lots had been subdivided, the deed recorded, and that was not accurately reflected in the paperwork that we received, which I realized as I was presenting to you last time. So the proper paperwork has been submitted, and just for clarification, this is the St. Joseph's Hospital. It has been divided into two different tracts, a small 0.75 acre parcel at the southeast corner is what HDC and the Milagro House have committed to develop in the future into affordable units. The remaining lot of the hospital campus, which is much larger, of course, is the one proposed for 175 units in the hospital building, as well as 53 or so townhouses on the west side of the lot. So this sewer planning module is a request for the sewer capacity for the entire development, both lots, HDC, Milagro House lot, and the Washington Place Equities lot, which is the larger portion. So happy to answer any questions about that if you have them.
So Douglas, when we heard this before, we weren't doing the two lots together?
Correct, and the reason for that is the lot used to be, the parcel address was 250 College Ave, and when it was subdivided, there was an additional parcel address that was created, and that's 210 College Ave. So the previous sewer planning module was requesting the same scope of project, but just didn't have the address correct. They submitted it under the situation of the entire parcel being whole, and now that whole block is two parcels, and so this accurately reflects that.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions. Are there any questions from the committee? Any questions from council as a whole? Questions from the public? Well, I'll hear a motion.
Motion to move this to full council on July 12th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we will do Resolution 57, 2022, adopting the Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan. And I see there's like a whole group of people here to share with us.
Full team this evening.
We know it always takes a little while to get set up here, so we actually planned for a friendly interlude. So I'll provide an introduction, if Ms. Craig, if you would like me to start.
Absolutely. Go right ahead. I was going to ask for one, so.
Okay, very good. Well, good evening again. Wanted to start, as I said, with a brief introduction here. Each year we come before City Council to share the annual action plan, which is essentially a general program budget for our HUD federal entitlement programs. As a reminder, HUD stands for the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. The annual action plan must fit and follow the city's approved 5-year consolidated plan. You may remember that the City Council and administration adopted the 5-year consolidated plan last year, and that was then submitted to and approved by HUD. One of the 5 bureaus in the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development, is the Bureau of Lead Safety and Community Development. They are responsible for the management of the city's federal HUD grants, and that includes the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, Home Partnerships Grant and the Lead Hazard Control Grant. Craig Walt, who I believe you all have met before. Craig, do you want to wave? Is here tonight. He's our bureau chief, and we also have our two community development administrators, Simone Dia and Bryn McGowan. Craig took the helm of the bureau in April 2021, and Simone and Bryn joined the team in September of last year. So this is a relatively new office or team that sits within Craig's bureau. I just wanted to take a moment to commend Craig and Simone and Bryn for the work that they've done. They've really jumped in to navigate a complex set of federal rules, ensuring that the city can deliver priority services and investments for the residents of the city. And without their daily attention to detail, to process, to all of the compliance requirements, we would literally be putting at risk millions of dollars that are serving our community coming from the federal government. So this small team here is doing really imperative work for the city and wanted to express appreciation. They were also proactive in wishing to present to you tonight, so I will turn it over to them now, and I'm here to assist with any questions and context as necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Director Delfs. Good evening, Council, and good evening, Mayor. Want to just appreciate you for the opportunity to present to you our draft 2022 annual action plan this evening. As Chris mentioned, this is specific to our entitlement funding received from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which we often refer to as HUD. At a previous public meeting held in early May of this year, the team shared about the outcomes and accomplishments from 2021. Those were related to the 2021 action plan, and now we're sharing about our planned activities for 2022. I'd also like to add that we held a public meeting last week on June 30th, specific to reviewing this year's annual action plan draft and receiving comments from the public. During this meeting, we had a full-length 25-minute version of the presentation, but for the sake of time this evening, we aim to provide a summarized version for Council. We will talk more about the process of the action planning cycle throughout the presentation, but if you're wondering, aren't we already in the middle of 2022? You're absolutely correct, and we'll actually talk about that specifically in a little more detail in the presentation. So now I'd like to hand things off to Simone and Bryn to introduce themselves and to guide us through the information they have prepared for you this evening, as well as provide some other details about the action plan public comment period. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. My name is Simone Dia, and I am one of the Community Development Administrators for the City of Lancaster, and I administratively manage the Emergency Solutions Grants.
Good evening, Councilors and Mayor. My name is Bryn McGowan, and I am also a Community Development Administrator for the city, and I primarily manage the city's Community Development Block Grant Program.
So as you can see on the screen here, there are 3 access points to our annual action plan. You may follow the URL and the events posting hyperlinks to access the annual action plan. Otherwise, you can visit the city's website at www.cityoflancasterpa.com. Following the headers and toggling through the subheaders, at the end, once you consult the documents and resources, you can find our draft 2022 annual action plan. Next slide. So as Craig mentioned, we did hold a community development forum on Thursday, June 30th at 6 p.m. here in Council Chambers at City Hall to engage the community and solicit their feedback on our annual action plan and to gather perspectives from our community residents on unmet needs and gaps in their communities, as well as glean the public's viewpoints on the distribution and accessibility of the city's HUD-funded programming. Unfortunately, there were no attendees at our CD meeting, and thus no comments were received to date. However, the city will continue to provide opportunities for the public to make comments or share remarks up until July 19th, which ends our public comment period. And now Craig will provide an overview of the CON plan and the annual action plan process.
Before you go on, Simone, I just want to clarify. There were no people that attended the June 30th meeting. That's a bummer. Thank you.
So as noted earlier, during this meeting tonight, we're presenting specifically on the fiscal year 2022 draft annual action plan, with the previous meeting that was held in May focusing on the prior year accomplishments. Just as a reminder, I want to note that last year's accomplishments and outcomes are reported to HUD on an annual basis in what's called the CAPER, and this is an approximate 50-page annual report that is submitted each year. And this report is also publicly available on the city's website and can be obtained by contacting any one of us in our office. So as shown on this slide, if you take a step back a little bit further, you can see what Director Delfs was describing about the 5-year consolidated plan and how that relates to each year's annual action plan. So you can see here on the slide that each action plan is a component of the 5-year plan, with the 5-year time frame being 2021 to 2025. Essentially, we completed year 1 of this plan, prepared the annual report, and shared an overview of those reported accomplishments, and now we're presenting on the draft for year 2. So the 5-year consolidated plan really spells out the general programs and activities and their relative budgets for the subsequent years. And as you all may remember, and likely better than myself since it's before I joined the city of Lancaster, this plan was developed in late 2020 to early 2021, and it included gathering feedback from hundreds of residents through Engage Lancaster and other methods, various public meetings, consultations with key stakeholders and community organizations, and referencing other available data to prepare and submit the plan. Council passed the 2021 to 2025 consolidated plan in April of 2021. So as I said earlier, you might be wondering, aren't we already halfway through 2022? And that's very correct, we are. And I wanted to point this out briefly to highlight the delayed timing of HUD issuing our fiscal year 2022 funding award notice. So typically HUD is to send us our upcoming fiscal year awards prior to the start of the program year, which for us is the calendar year starting January 1st. However, more recently, HUD has been months behind in issuing these award notifications, which has then delayed the development and submission of the annual action plans well into the midst of the year. So this year we received our notice of award in the beginning of June, and therefore we anticipate submitting our final plan before the end of July, with August 16th being the hard deadline.
Okay, so just to give you guys a little bit of a refresher on the city's HUD entitlement programs, the city is the recipient of 3 primary HUD entitlement programs on an annual basis. They are the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG, and the Home Investment Partnerships Grant, or HOME. CDBG primarily supports critical and innovative community development programs, services, and projects both internally and externally in the city. It strives to serve primarily low and moderate income persons, households, and neighborhoods, and is directly managed and administered by the city. ESG supports homelessness services related to emergency shelter, outreach, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention, and is a joint funding collaboration between the Lancaster County Housing and Redevelopment Authority, the Continuum of Care, and the Lancaster County Homelessness Coalition. And finally, HOME helps to subsidize the development of affordable rental housing and homes for sale to first-time home buyers. And the city is a HOME consortium partner with the Lancaster County Housing and Redevelopment Authority serving as the lead agency. And the city typically receives around $5,000 a year in HOME funding annually. And if you have any questions or concerns regarding the city's planned programming for HOME, that is all found in the county's annual action plan, as they are the lead consortium partner for that funding stream. Now I will hand it back over to Simone, who will give you an update on the city's 2022 ESG funding.
Thank you, Bryn. So as depicted in this slide, you can likely tell that we did not receive any ESG entitlement funds awarded. There were no funds awarded to the city of Lancaster for ESG entitlement. So naturally, this unexpected news was a surprise to us as well. But let me emphasize that the reasons related to us not receiving an ESG entitlement award had nothing to do with program performance, use of funds, or local decisions. Next slide. So you're likely wondering what caused the change in allocation. The decision not to fund the city is completely based on a HUD formula allocation, on a HUD formula that looks at several measures of community need: population, extent of poverty, housing overcrowding, age of housing. All of these components compare the community's needs in relation to all metropolitan areas. However, the main influencers are total federal allocation and population. As a sidebar, this is not the first time the City of Lancaster was not a recipient of ESG entitlement funds. For several years prior to 2014, the city was not a beneficiary of ESG entitlement funds. Next slide. Since none of the previous variables were within our control, we feel fortunate to have built strategic partnerships with like-minded specialist organizations, namely the Lancaster County Redevelopment Authorities. Over the last 8 years, we have cultivated a joint funding application and relationship for the city of Lancaster, including collaboration with other partner agencies such as the Office for the Coalition and the United Way. In an effort to address the lack of ESG entitlement funds, the city and Lancaster County Redevelopment Authorities worked collectively and diligently on applying for ESG funds through Pennsylvania's Department of Community and Economic Development for emergency shelter and homelessness prevention activities. This was a recommendation from HUD. Collectively, we fast-tracked the joint application and completed submission in under 2 weeks. We're hopeful to receive funding from the DCED. If awarded, these funds will not only be a win for the city and county, but will also allow us to maintain the continuity of essential services for emergency shelter and homelessness prevention. So you're probably wondering, what does compliance have to do with any of this? We see compliance in our other funding streams like CDBG as a way of being more efficient, effective, and intentional in community planning, building, and execution of community development initiatives and programs. And now I'll hand it over to Bryn, who will provide a summary of the CDBG programming.
And if I may interrupt you again, sorry. Thank you, Simone. Can you please remind me of how much money we applied to DCED for ESG dollars?
Yes, approximately for $389,000. 155 of which will go towards homelessness prevention and 239 for emergency shelter.
And our total allocation in previous years was just our usual allocation, not the CARES money or the COVID-related.
Roughly 145,000.
Yes. So this is just to give a contrast for what we're applying for in contrast to what we had received before.
Correct.
So the bad news that we may not have gotten this award may turn into something better if we are successful in our application.
Correct.
And you have a question behind you from Mr. Stuhldreher.
I heard the 239,000 for emergency shelter. Didn't catch the previous number.
155 for homelessness prevention. Homelessness prevention.
And does that pertain only to the city, or is that the county as a whole?
The county as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so since the city did not receive any ESG entitlement allocation this year, our annual action plan for 2022 is primarily focused on what we're going to use and how we're going to use our CDBG dollars. So in 2022, HUD allocated $1,605,786 in CDBG entitlement funding for us. This funding is going to be used to further the goals and priorities set out in our 2021 to 2025 consolidated plan. To 1, maintain quality affordable housing, 2, to increase affordable housing opportunities, 3, to promote neighborhood quality of life, 4, to expand economic opportunities, and then some of the funding is also going to go towards planning and administration costs of our HUD entitlement programs. And these dollars all work together to support our low-mod income community members and neighborhoods. So the city plans to allocate this funding to eligible activity areas that were also approved in the 2021 to 2025 consolidated plan. And you can find a specific list of the activities that we are planning to fund in the handout that's in your folder. So these are just very high-level eligible activity areas that we're planning to allocate the funding towards. So in 2022, we're looking to dedicate $881,551 towards affordable housing preservation and development activities, $210,000 towards public facilities and improvements, $235,000 for public services, $20,000 for economic development activities, and then the remaining $235,000 towards our planning and administration costs. So this slide depicts our 2022 planned budget allocation in comparison to our estimated 5-year strategic plan allocations for each 5-year goal. So here we see that our proposed 2022 allocation approach is in general alignment with the estimated allocation priorities within our consolidated plan. And please note that each of these values also include 25% of our planning and administration costs as well. And then finally, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of context and an idea of the approach that the city takes in utilizing our CDBG funding. So it's important to note that we really are working with limited resources when it comes to this funding stream. We received around $100,000 less this year than we did last year to fund 10 critical city community development oriented activities. So that really does mean that we're working in a pretty constrained environment, but we are trying to do less with more. We're also trying to ensure HUD statutory compliance. As Chris mentioned, there are very complex regulations governing the usage of this funding that really drives how and what we are able to do with it. So with those two things in mind, we're really trying to create impactful solutions that maximize benefit to our low and moderate income community members. So we've kind of developed an approach where we utilize this funding to fund core city-centric community services like our housing code program and our street improvement program, and try and funnel as much of the money as we can to improving low and moderate income neighborhoods. We're also trying to focus on furthering quality affordable housing, maintaining the quality of housing and our housing stock, but also trying to develop more affordable housing opportunities as well. So about 54% of our 2022 allocation goes towards activities of this kind. And our programs within this general activity area, like critical repair and lead hazard control, really are like very direct benefit and impactful programs in the city. We've also tried to take a more innovative approach to implementing some public services that have a direct community benefit with our health and housing social worker, the police social worker program, and their neighborhood engagement program manager that seek to provide direct services to citizens requiring services related to housing, health, and just community engagement in general. And then we're also trying to, leverage some diverse resources with our funding this year, looking at ways we could leverage CDBG with ARPA, with Home ARP, and with other homes to maximize our impact for the community. And finally, Simone again.
Thank you, Bryn. So just a reminder that our public comment period is open until July 19th, and you may contact any one of our program staff at the respective email addresses or phone numbers on the screen. And this is an opportunity to provide feedback on our annual action plan, as well as I'd like to garner your attention to the feedback-focused questions for the public. We are engaging the public to also obtain their perspectives on those particular areas as it relates to unmet needs or gaps in their own communities, as well as gathering feedback on what they see as being a priority should additional funding become available, as well as obtaining their remarks and feedback on what their experience has been in the delivery and accessibility of the city's HUD-funded programming. Thank you.
And just one other thing to note, as Bryn was sharing about some of the programs that are funded under the housing category, on the handout, you'll see that some of those funds go to support lead hazard control, and you might be wondering, why do we put CDBG funds towards lead hazard control if we have this really large HUD-led grant? And actually, that is a really great example of us being able to leverage CDBG resources to achieve the match that the large lead hazard control grant requires. So that CDBG money that's going towards it helps us leverage additional money for the city of Lancaster. Thanks.
Thank you. You actually answered the question that I had, because I was wondering how that fit into the lead hazard program. But I don't have any further questions at this time. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be any later. But thank you for the presentation. And are there any questions from the committee?
If I may, excuse me, if I may, Councilor Craig? Can you guys touch again on what the impact is going to be on city services from not receiving ESG funds and kind of, I guess, potential ways to fill that gap? I know we mentioned about some other funds that we applied for, but are there other ways that that we're looking at filling the gaps for that funding as well?
Well, essentially, our greatest recourse is to have applied to the Department of Community and Economic Development. We're just extremely hopeful that we'll receive an award from that entity. These programs and services that are provided to our community, they are going to take a hit, essentially, because without the funding, there are services that can't be provided, staff salaries that can't be paid. So we'll just have to basically just do more with less.
And I know you mentioned ARPA. Have we looked at the possibility of ARPA filling some of the gap, or is that not a possibility?
And Councilor Arroyo, if I may, just to answer your previous question, to add something to that, in participating in the joint funding partnership with the county and the United Way, one thing we always, as the city, needed to be really mindful of is at what point the decision-making process is happening about the programs and services that get funded and how that relates to who is bringing what to the table. And what we've been able to really ensure is that the decisions being made have nothing to do with the geographic location of these services, and the issue that we were experiencing with the city's ESG allocation was not affecting any of that decision making. But as Simone noted, overall, just as the city's experiencing a resource constrained environment, so is the total joint funding pot. And for those reasons, they are working with reduced funding, especially when you consider we're coming off the heels of the additional CARES Act funding that was coming through ESG.
Thank you, that's helpful. And just to thank you for the presentation as well. I love Director Delfs, but it's a breath of fresh air. No, kidding. But thank you for the presentation.
Are there any further questions from the committee?
Councilor Craig. Just a question. The plan information sheet is super helpful. Two questions, I guess. Will this be available online, or did I miss that part?
That's a great, question. Yeah. We will make it available online, yes.
And then under the housing umbrella, there's listed proactive housing code enforcement.
Yeah.
So does that include salaries for additional inspectors or just general resources for inspections?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. So that is essentially funding towards the salaries and code enforcement efforts of the inspectors that work for the city in predominantly low moderate income neighborhoods.
Great.
So we fund 60% of their work there because 60% of the city is low mod income. So that's our rationale for funding the work that they do, hopefully utilizing it to target more disadvantaged areas.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any further questions from council?
Councilor Craig? Thank you for that presentation. It was really helpful. I just have a few questions. The first being with the timeline for the DCET grant, do you have any idea when you might receive notification of award?
We filed on June 10th. I think we're hoping to have a response from DCED around October, if I'm not mistaken. It's October.
Or I believe the contracts typically are initiated at the beginning of October, And in our experience, we usually hear something back from DCED within 60 days. So I think we're hoping to hear at least something back by the end of, what would that be? Early August.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
The second question I had was looking through the planned funding for 2022. I see CDBG, I see no allocation for ESG, and I don't see any allocation for home for 2022. Was there
Right.
no allocation received, or?
No, all those details are available in the county's annual action plan. I think I don't know, did you know how much we received, Craig?
I can't recall their total allocation off the top of my mind, but it was very much in line with what's been coming towards Lancaster County. And the city's portion, as Bryn noted, is typically around $500,000 a year. I believe our amount this year was, I think, $498 or something like that. But as noted, all of that information, because the county is the lead agency of that program, gets noted in the county's annual action plan.
And just to follow up on that, that RFP for home dollars was issued earlier this year. Proposals have been received and are being reviewed, and decisions are being made related to those allocations.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the review period, and the city's 2022 portion was eligible to be dispersed through that RFP. So that was being taken into account as we prepared the RFP, expecting to receive a 2022 allocation.
And then my last question, I'll take a look at the allocation pieces, because I still don't think I understand, but you're saying there's some details as to what is county, what is city in regards to each of these funding sources and the allocation. Is that correct? Because if there's a whole pot of money available, but the county's leading it, we're not allocating by city anymore, it's just,
So essentially, similar, I guess there'll be two things I'll note here. Similar to what is happening with ESG, there's been times in the city's past when they were a direct home recipient, but that hasn't been the case for quite some time. And so independent of if the city was not a part of the home consortium, we would not just therefore receive our own allotment directly. But by participating in the consortium, we're able to essentially receive what shakes out to be approximately 30% of that total county allocation, which essentially gets granted to us as a subrecipient. And there's a couple other things that go into the consortium relationship. So the county does handle some of the ongoing administrative requirements. They take the lead when it comes to the environmental reviews that come along with home-funded projects. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily describe this as the city's direct allocation that we are then bringing to the consortium. Entering the consortium is what actually gives the city, like I said, approximately 30% of that funds to allocate directly towards city projects.
so we'd be looking at like 30% of the 500,000.
The 30% of the total allocation ends up being roughly around $500,000 for the city.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And
Councilor
then-
Walsh, if I may, maybe I'll just add to that briefly, since I've gone through this a couple times, last couple of years with the home program. So I thought Craig did a nice job of explaining it. Just, it's a little bit tricky. Typically, and I'm just going to use rough numbers, but if the city is receiving about $500,000 per year in home funding, and the county's receiving about $2 million, say, per year in home funding, the $500,000 is used for city projects, the $2 million is used for county projects, but the real benefit of the consortium is that we're actually working on the administration of the projects together, and we're analyzing all of the projects together. So we have a sense of what affordable housing projects are proposed in the county and in the city at the same time. So the selection committee can make an integrated decision across city and county jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And my last question is, when it comes to allocating these funds, how is this money accessible? So is there an RFP process for CDBG, ESG, and home? I know there was one for home, obviously, but what about CDBG? I mean, we don't need to talk about ESG this particular year because there isn't anything, but how do outside agencies access this funds? Or is it a majority of city programs and city services administration that is being funded?
Yeah, I would say, and as you can see from the handout, there is quite a number of internal city programs and services that get funded with CDBG dollars, and so that ends up being mainly an internal decision. However, it is very guided by the consolidated planning process and does go towards the priorities that are highlighted through that process. If there were funds to be made available externally within a particular program or category, we would follow those standard procurement rules and either look at sealed bids, or if it was a very unique program or service that we were looking for, there are a couple other methods that HUD will allow, but typically that would we would first look at doing an RFP process for anything that was made available to the public.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Counselor Craig, if I had a couple thoughts. Counselor Walsh, just to note that since 1974, CDBG funds have been flowing through the city of Lancaster, but over time, that flow of funds has looked like this, so that there's been a pretty steady decline of CDBG funds over time. And in years past, in previous administrations, there was a much more robust community grant-making process through CDBG funds, but I would say that that really gave way with the last recession and in the 2000s. So I just wanted to note that because there is a lot of history with CDBG funding in the city of Lancaster that has transpired over time. And then the second question was a question that I was asked by a community member, and Craig, you answered it so well, and I'm not going to remember the details of that answer, but I thought it might benefit counselors to have a response to this, which is there has been reported that the city has not allocated all of the CDBG funds from previous years. And since we're talking about the consolidated plan and the annual plan simultaneously, can you talk about why there was money, quote, left over from previous years, to just explain how that works?
Certainly, Mayor. Thank you for bringing that up, because I do know that was an outstanding question. And so I think first I'll describe that in the CAPER, the annual report that gets submitted to HUD each year, we're required to report out what is available in the city's line of credit. That includes any funds that have been allocated to street projects, different programs and services, but unspent money that remains in the line of credit. So we had reported out on what was available in our line of credit towards the end of 2021, which I believe at the time was approximately around $2 million. And that might seem like a large amount of money. Now, CDBG funds can be carried over multiple years, but there are other spending deadlines that come into play along that timeline. And so each year, there's actually a timeliness measure that HUD performs based on the amount you have in that line of credit. Now, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the slide that I pointed out, the consolidated planning slide, and when I mentioned how late HUD has been issuing our funds. So they had issued nearly $1.7 million of funds in August or September of 2021, and then we were reporting what was available in the line of credit towards the end of the year. So basically that whole year's allocation had just been deposited in our account. Now, I'm talking about this measure, and in this forum, it'll be complicated to describe exactly how it's calculated, but what I can say is the last 2 years, HUD waived that measure because most communities were not going to meet the mark, but the city of Lancaster achieved a successful timeliness measure last year performing much better than many other communities throughout the country.
Okay. I do have one question. So the $2 million that the county gets, do they allocate the 500,000 to the city from that, or is it just included in what they apply for?
So it ends up being based on their total allocation, and then we get approximately 30% of the total allocation. And so apologies that I don't have the county's total allocation available for reference. But if it was roughly around 2 million, we're taking the 500,000 out of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I wanted to know. Thank you. Any other questions from council? Questions from the public? There's one right behind you.
Would just like to note that the draft plan is a fairly daunting 117-page document. Wondering if there's any kind of, easier to read summaries available to the public, if so, where that would be, and also any info available in Spanish.
Yeah, great questions. I think we can work on potentially posting our information sheet to the website as well that distills the information from the plan, as well as getting it translated.
And I would also just add that that is also one of the main purposes of the public meeting that was held last week, so that we could spend some time trying to translate the 100-page document into somewhat of a digestible format. But I also want to note that we, the staff in our office, are always available to answer any questions during business hours. So don't hesitate to reach out if there is anything that you find in that plan that leads to questions. Please reach out to us. We're happy to help.
Craig, could I get a copy of the plan for last year?
Certainly.
Thank you.
I think it may also be helpful if we have not already, I think we could put the presentation from the community meeting and/or the presentation to council tonight. I think that was a nice way to distill down the 117-page document. Unfortunately, we do have to make, fortunately or unfortunately, we have to make the 117-page document available officially for public comment. And if I'm correct, we also held another public meeting, another community meeting prior to the one on June 30th, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, so there were actually two.
Were there attendees at that meeting?
Yeah, there were 6.
Yes.
There were 6.
6 people, yeah.
Crowded room. Thank you. Any further questions from the public? No? So thank you very much for the presentation. It was very well done, very informative, and I appreciate all the information. And I will hear a motion to move this to full council on the 12th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Vice President, that concludes community planning.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Then we move to the Public Works Committee. Councilor Walsh.
Thank you, Vice President. This evening, we have 5 items on the agenda. The first being Administration Bill Number 13-2022, amending the water ordinance. The second being Administration Resolution Number 59-2022, authorizing a maintenance agreement for Landis Drive green infrastructure. The third being Administration Resolution 58-2022, authorizing a grant resolution for water system improvements. And the last 2, a proposed stormwater ordinance amendment and a sidewalk program update. And I believe we are fortunate enough to have Director Campbell on the screen. So I will let him take the lead in discussing the first item on the agenda, Bill Number 13-2022, amending the water ordinance. Hi, Director Campbell.
Mr. Harris, can he hear us? And first and foremostly,
There we go.
Director Campbell, can you hear us now?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Now we got it.
now we got it. Okay.
We're good?
Little audio check.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you turn the volume up?
Yeah.
please?
Turn that way up.
Okay, very good. Are you able to see the PowerPoint presentation? I can hear you now, yes. Can you hear me? Are we in sync?
Steve, can you share that on your screen? Since I'm projecting you, I can't do that.
Oh, you need me to?
Yes.
Okay, you need me to do it? Okay, hold on. Hold on just a second. Yes, hold on just a second. Okay. Hold on, hold on, hold on. There's a rather mean delay I'm hearing. Share screen. Okay, can you see the Administration Bill 13, 2022?
Yes, we can.
Very good. So this is a two-part presentation. I will be co-presenting this with Patrick Hopkins because the second part of this regards the water. The water rates. So I just wanted to very quickly let people know if people don't fully understand what a backflow preventer is, which is a huge part of what this piece of legislation is about. I just wanted to spend a half a moment to let you know that the backflow preventers are the things that help protect our potable water. The potable water is protected. This is the backflow preventer is what keeps the potable water separated from any other contamination. Generally speaking, water is protected by water pressure. It's the location of your water tanks or the relationship between how much water you're using, how often or quickly you're using. If the water is in balance properly, your potable water is safely protected. However, there are a number of instances when the balance is off or the pressure changes. There might be a fire and a significant use of a fire hydrant changes the water pressure in an area. Water main might, or the pipe freeze, or there might actually be high demand for any reasons regarding summertime or excessive water use. Those are all things that can affect the water pressure and might allow untreated, not clean water to contaminate the potable water system. So the backflow prevention are the devices or the design instruments that ensure the protection of your potable water. The city needs to update and modify its backflow prevention system, and the water regulations are all codified in Chapter 295 of the Code of the City of Lancaster. As a result of the city's PUC tariff and administrative changes for proper operation and efficiency, we need to make additional changes, including rate changes and clarifications to Chapter 295. The summary of the change, I'm not going to go through these changes in detail. There are basically three categories of changes. One is just for clarification, so that it is not subject to other people's interpretation of what should and should not go in. Secondly, there have been upgrades in technology so that we want to be able to be collecting data consistently and comprehensively for the future. And the third is that there are upgrades, there are adjustments that needed to be made to coincide with what we've agreed with the PUC. A very, very quick summary of some of these changes include one customer per service pipe. This is allowing for uniformity in resolving a recurring lack of clarity that has often caused a challenge whenever we approach the PUC rate changes. A number of things related to information on applications. The application process has been modified and made simpler to better manage the underlying data. We've added requirements for lot numbers, plumbers' names, and things like that, as well as a variety of other pieces of detail, so that we can have a more comprehensive database of the infrastructure that we maintain. The applications needed to be updated, and therefore the subsection, the subchapter in 295 also had to be updated. Responsibility for customers. You'll find that some of these clarifications are related to recurring challenges that we've had where people have said, well, I believe it's this way, you believe it should be that way. The responsibility of the customer is responsible for all equipment used to monitor consumption, notably if a meter is lost, broken, or damaged. That has been clarified. The size and location of the meter is more specifically identified, and there are certain circumstances where there's particular elements that needed to be taken into consideration. There's some wording changes that make that much clearer. I'm not going to go into the details of that. The deposits, going into the financial management of how we address deposits, etc. There was language in the chapter that contradicted how we currently manage it with the PUC and the Public Utility Code. So much of that language was deleted so that it would be in line. If deposits are required, they will be done consistent with the regulations of the PUC and Public Utility Code. We've removed those conflicts. On the issue of multiple units, this whole section was also deleted because it was allowing a situation where there might be more than one meter per building or building lot. And that is not the way we operate, so we removed that offending clause. The temporary service from a fire hydrant became an issue, partly because it was a fire hydrant access was often used for construction purposes, or it was not metered and or not managed, and therefore we were basically giving away water for public safety purposes. And there are many provisions in the chapter that allows for us to be able to claim that. So there were changes made to the wording of this particular section so that it is clear, and there are requirements prohibiting including requirements and prohibitions for metering and billing for such use, and those things are clarified. Last, but certainly not least, is the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection requires utility permits for all locations where water is withdrawn from hydrants connected to the utilities distribution system. Typo, the customer must contact utility to arrange for such permits and utility issued isolation devices and billing metering before water may be withdrawn at any PADEP location listed. And in the chapter, there's a list of 20 addresses, and it is noted that this list may be updated by resolution of the City Council as necessary. As I said, there's more detail to this. The document itself, I believe, was delivered to you, and it shows what the changes are in red line form, but all of those changes are basically to clarify and or to align the Chapter 295 with what we've agreed to with the PUC and clarification in conformity and upgrade of technology. Before I go on, I guess I should ask if there's any questions about these items before I hand it over to Patrick, who'll talk about the water rates.
Are there any questions from any committee members? No. Any questions from council as a whole?
Counselor Walsh. Director Campbell, I'm hoping you'll be able to hear my question. You had been going through some of the high-level changes that are proposed, and you mentioned 1 meter per building, and that there are instances where there are currently buildings that have multiple meters, but you also mentioned that this is to make these rules in line with actual practices. So what is the actual practice now, and what might that mean for folks that have multiple units and currently have multiple meters on those buildings?
Yes.
He's working with
That's a very good question. The general practice and the accepted practice is that there is only 1 meter per building. There had been several cases, not a lot of them, but several cases where there were multiple customers, if you will, in a particular building. And that often created the type of chaos that created challenges with the billing, etc. Our practice is for there to be 1 meter per lot, and the owner of that lot takes care of how it gets disaggregated between the different customers, tenants, or users of the facility. This is just to make sure that the language is aligned with practice and that it is consistent with what the PUC allows.
Thank you very much, Director Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Walsh. Director Delfs, I actually have a question around the multi-use as well, but I think you answered it with that last line regarding what the PUC allows. I'm kind of just curious as to why multi-units have 1 meter per household, and why doesn't it go the route of 1 meter? And I'm not sure if this is appropriate for this conversation.
If there aren't other questions, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
I'll be happy to email the question later. It's not that important for this conversation, so I'll pass Councilor Walsh.
Great, thank you. Any pressing questions for Director Campbell from the public? No.
It's not a bad question. The simplicity of it is that you really want one account, 1 meter to show how much water is going to a particular lot or to a particular site, a tax lot, if you will. It ought not to be the burden of the city to try to figure out how the water is disaggregated between a variety of tenants, especially if the tenants might change and or the regrouping of the tenant use might change. So the simplicity, consistent with the PUC, is for 1 meter per lot, and any other division gets taken care of as an administrative or an accounting measure.
Thank you, Director Delfs. That was Director Campbell. That was very helpful.
I'm a bit wary on how to proceed, given the huge delay. I'm happy to make, Patrick, if you want to take the next part, I feel.
Steve and I, believe it or not, had worked this out beforehand, so I'm ready to take when the delay catches up to Steve and he puts it on the rates slide, I'm ready to take
Okay.
over at that point.
Shall I turn it over to Patrick?
Yes.
You would think that he's on the other side of the earth, but he's on Howard Avenue. He's really not that far away. Okay, so you see a rate chart up in front of you, and maybe, actually what I can do is partially to answer the question that you had, Councilor Arroyo, about the multiple meters at a property. So in general, each property is served by one lateral, so one pipe that connects the water main out in the street with the property itself. A water bill that a customer gets is actually made up of two separate charges. There is a customer charge, or it's sometimes referred to as a meter charge, which is a flat rate, and that is based on the size of the lateral that comes to into the property. And then the second charge is the consumption charge, which is variable based on how much water is actually used at the property. So the challenge with having one line that comes into the property and then multiple meters on that line is how the meter charge would get allocated across those the customer charge would get allocated across those individual meters. In some water systems, they refer to the customer charge as a ready charge, which is basically, and the reason that it's based on the size of the lateral coming into the property is that if you imagine what it would take to basically provide water into a property that requires a 12-inch lateral, and those do exist there's a couple of them outside of the city that exist, versus the standard residential property, which has a 5/8 inch lateral. It takes much more water pressure and basically system to feed that 12-inch line coming into a property versus the residential property. So then if you extrapolate that to, well, I'm going to put 3 meters on this line, how do you allocate those charges across the various meters? So that's the challenge, and why 1 meter per property is the standard. So with that said, I want to address the chart that you see up on the page here. As you know, in late September of last year, we filed a rate case with the Public Utility Commission that wended its way through that process. We had a settlement that resulted in, I believe, April, and sometime in May, the full Public Utility Commission approved that settlement. So with that settlement, the rates, and if you look at the chart, third from the bottom there was the Lancaster City outside rate. And this is looking at an average residential customer who uses 12,000 gallons of water in a quarter. Those outside city customers, on average, the residential property was paying $70.52 per quarter. And with the PUC approved rate settlement, that increased to $81.40 per quarter. When we introduced the 2022 budget, we were making an estimate of water revenues based on what we hope to achieve out of the PUC rate case, with an assumption that that would be resolved and new rates in place in May. And it turned out that the new rates actually went into effect on June 29th. And then we also had an assumption on a corresponding inside rate increase where that would also go into effect in May of 2022. And now we're before you in July, because this is when the PUC approved rates went into effect for outside, and so now we're in effect sort of trying to true up the inside and outside city rates based on the process that we went through with the PUC. So the ordinance that's in front of you, in addition to all of the other regulatory issues that Director Campbell talked about, includes changes in 2 different sets of rates. It does not propose any change in the flat customer charge. So those stay exactly the same as they were prior to this ordinance proposal. What changes for the inside city customers is the variable rate, the consumption rate. So you see that in that Exhibit A to the ordinance. And then the other charges that change are fire line charges. Those are only charges that apply to properties that have sprinkler systems and have to have a filled fire line at the property, and there's a separate charge for that. And primarily those are either residential apartment buildings or their commercial or industrial properties. So for the most part, when you're looking at a residential property, the only rates that are affected in this ordinance are the consumption rates. And there are 3 tiers of consumption rates. The first tier is where the vast majority of residential customers fall, because it is all usage in a quarter up to 75,000 gallons. So unless something very unusual has happened at a residential property, they're going to be well under that 75,000 gallons. And 12 to 13,000 gallons is about the average in our system. I think with the PUC rate case, it was something like 13,300 gallons per quarter was the actual average. So the increase that is included in this ordinance would raise the average inside residential customers bill from $84.15 to $95.70. So that works out to about $3.85 per month on average for those residential customers. The other thing I wanted to address is just sort of how this and the PUC approved rate increase impact the 2022 budget and what our actual results will be. So when the 2022 water fund budget was adopted in December of 2021, it included a $2.25 million deficit. So we were going to have $2.25 million more of expenses than we did of revenues. And effectively, the reason for that was because of the timing of the PUC rate case, in that they take essentially up to 9 months to get resolved. We did not want to come to you with an inside city rate increase until we had that the outside city rates approved. So the budget assumptions that we made for in the 2022 budget were that the combined inside and outside rate increases were going to produce an additional $2.4 million in 2022. Because of the timing of the PUC rate case and this ordinance, we now estimate that increase is going to be about $1,635,000. So about $800,000 less in new revenue in 2022 than originally anticipated. However, we also have seen an increase in the first half of the year just in water revenues without any rate increases at all. From January to June in 2021 versus January to June in 2022, we've seen an increase of about $1.8 million in water revenues, or about a 13.4% increase. So while we're going to be shorter on revenue because of the rate increase, the PUC rate increase timing and this rate increase timing, we should still be in pretty good shape within the water fund and hopefully actually eat into or erase that deficit during the year. And the only thing I can attribute that increase in water revenues from is just increased economic activity. I mean, it is very difficult to determine where, the water rents are based on water consumption. So if water consumption is up for whatever reason, then those water revenues are going to be up. If it's down, those revenues are going to be down. And so far, at least through the first half of this year, we're up about 13%. So I will leave it at that and just open it up for any questions that you may have.
Any questions from other committee members? Or council as a whole?
If I may, Councilor Wass. Ms. Hopkins, and this might be a dumb question, so I apologize, but just looking at the information, seeing the gap between city residents' proposed rates and then outside residents, Lancaster County residents, and their rates. Maybe I'm just not reading this right, but from my understanding, when we changed the rates and prior to the PUC approving that, it was to create more equity. And then just kind of seeing this at face value, there looks like there's that, with our new proposal, we're just creating a gap there. Am I not looking at this correctly, or is?
No, unfortunately, you are looking at it correctly. Well, not unfortunately, you are looking at it correctly. So the gap that is currently there with the rates that we started the year with was about $11 per quarter higher inside the city versus outside the city. With the changes that are proposed in this ordinance, that basically that same gap exists. And there's really, there's one overriding issue that is the reason for that. Part of it is that well, there's two overriding issues, really. The PUC rate-making process is long and arduous, and we typically, the history has been, while we can justify X rate, what actually gets approved through the process is about 2/3 of the rate that we can justify. One of the things that is a difference is the PUC approved meter charge, that flat customer charge for the residential property with a 5/8 inch meter. It's about $4 higher inside the city right now than the PUC approved for outside city customers. That is just a function of going through that process. Ultimately, we arrived at a settlement. There is a process through the PUC rate making that a settlement is not reached. And then we go through, we are outside of the settlement process, and we're basically arguing to the PUC that there are reasons for a higher increase beyond those that have been approved by. There are three different bodies within the Public Utility Commission. There's the Office of Consumer Advocate, the Office of Small Business Advocate, and another one that I can't remember. But those three bodies all pick apart our rate proposal, and they all have to sign off on the settlement that we arrived at. So part of it is just the PUC rate-making process versus the inside city process. The overriding issue, the other overriding issue, though, is that we make that budget transfer from the water fund of $4 million each year to go into the general fund. Through the PUC rate-making process, they do not allow us to apply any of the expense of that transfer to the outside city customers. So in effect, the burden of that entire transfer is falling on inside city customers. With that said, one of the issues that we have inside the city is a large number of tax-exempt properties. A lot of those large tax-exempt properties are also large water users. So there is some level of return, if you will, from those customers who are not property taxpayers, but ultimately pay a water and sewer bill. It's certainly not $4 million worth. Prior to the beginning of the Gray administration, there has always been, and I'll say always, I mean at least for the last 3 or 4 decades, a transfer from the water fund to the general fund. Prior to a rate case that we filed in 2007, I believe it was, the city had always applied for rate increases under $1 million. And that threshold is, below that threshold, there is much less scrutiny by the Public Utility Commission. And I don't think that transfer from the water fund to the general fund ever got any scrutiny. When we went for the large rate increase after we built the 2 membrane plants, the Conestoga and the Susquehanna water plants, that was a proposed increase of somewhere around $5 million. That got a significant amount of scrutiny, and that was the first time that I was made aware of that the PUC would not allow the cost of that transfer to be borne by all water customers, that it had to be borne only by the inside city customers.
Thank you for that, and always appreciate your historical context on these items.
I wish I didn't have it all, but
And,
I do.
So,
And I wish we had a better system.
Yes.
so I guess to summarize, in order to come up with a truly equitable solution for city residents that don't carry the cost burden for a lot of these items, the level of
Can you
change
still
would
hear
have to, the level of change would have to happen at the PUC level then,
Yes.
or
and I-
advocacy for change.
I mean, without, there are other avenues for a different rate-making process, but I won't get into all those here. But the one thing I do want to say, and it will rely on future rate cases in front of the Public Utility Commission, is that in effect for the last two or probably last two rate cases that we've taken in front of the commission, we have paid somewhat of a
You
penalty
still hear me,
for
folks?
having
Yes.
capital projects that we said we were going to complete by X date included in the rate case, and then we didn't complete the project. And effectively, what the Public Utility Commission has said is, we're not going to give you any additional rate to pay for capital projects unless you can definitively show us that you've completed, you have or you will complete those projects by the end of the coming year. In the last rate case, both Director Campbell and Christine Volke-Hilditch did a great job in talking with the state parties to give them additional information about the process that they were using to get capital projects implemented. We had some capital projects in the 2014 rate case that were still not completed as of the time that we filed this most recent rate case. And that's caused us a problem through that rate-making process. We are now, by the end of this year, we'll have completed not just all of those other projects, but all of the projects that we said we were going to complete in this most recent rate case. So I do think that the rates that we got through the most recent settlement were lower than they would have been
I cannot
otherwise,
hear you.
had our history been better.
Thank you.
All I can say is I apologize. I have COVID. I can't go in today. And I have one more presentations to make. I'm not quite sure how to get this done.
Well, we can hear you.
You can hear me
Yes.
Oh, delay is
in real time?
Well, mostly.
Okay. It's not such a bad delay at this point. Are we ready to go on to Landis Drive? I couldn't hear everything going on before.
If there are no more questions from the public for Patrick before we move on, or any questions while we have the director in real time.
Patrick, just briefly mention.
And I can't hear.
Okay. Patrick is presenting now.
I'm sorry.
So for Landis Drive, this is a very simple one. This is,
We're not there yet.
okay.
Well, the purpose of that is to support general fund operations. The argument that I have, well, I guess it's the argument that I inherited because I remember this being a discussion long ago, is that it was the city residents, city taxpayers were the original creators of the water system.
Okay.
So that they deserve a return on that investment for having
I'm on mute on
created
both
the water
places.
system in the first place.
You can hear me? I can't hear you. Okay.
Counselor Walsh, at this point, I think we need to
Yeah.
move this one forward, and then we can see where we stand with Director Campbell's delay.
Great. So I will make a motion to move Administration Bill number 13, 2022, amending the water ordinance to full council on July 12th.
So move.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Do we have-
Second.
Okay, thank you. The next item that we will be discussing this evening is Administration Resolution 59-2022 authorizing,
All approved.
I'm sorry,
I'm sorry.
can, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we will talk about Administration Resolution 59-2022, authorizing a maintenance agreements for Landis Drive green
now.
infrastructure.
So Landis Drive, and you can hear me.
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Landis Drive is a very simple project. We're really just seeking an administrative authority to enter into an intergovernmental cooperation agreement. The green infrastructure that we're doing at Landis Drive transcends not only lands and public right-of-way in the city of Lancaster, it crosses a little bit of Lancaster Township, this little space here, which is blown up to be this area of Landis Drive between Red Maple Road and Dogwood Lane. We need to be able to work nicely. You can't see me. Okay.
Yeah, if you can share your screen again.
Hold on. Believe it or not, I am not a Luddite. Can you see the map now?
Yes.
Can you see the map now?
Yes.
Okay, so we're talking about some green infrastructure along Landis Drive, which is in this part of the city of Lancaster, but it crosses this little piece, which is in Lancaster Township. It is this stretch of Landis Drive between Red Maple Road and Dogwood Lane that we need to have interagency, an intergovernmental cooperation agreement with the Lancaster Township in order to develop the maintenance, repair, and GI responsibilities for Landis Drive. There are no costs to the city, no organizational structure, and no new entity is created. We just need the authority to be able to work with the adjacent municipality, and that is what this administrative resolution is about, period. Any questions?
Any questions from committee members? Council as a whole? Questions from the public? Then I will make a motion to move Administration Resolution number 59-2022 to full council on July 12th.
Second.
Very good. Shall I go on to the next one? Water.
In just a moment. We don't, oh, she's away. So all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moving along.
The next one we will be discussing is Administration Resolution 50.
The next is
2022.
Administrative Resolution 58-2022. The city needs permission to submit an application for funding to replace service lines. Let me just back document up. It doesn't matter. There's no graphics to this one, so I'm not going to share. I'm not going to show you. The city needs permission to submit an application for funding. The Community Development Block Grant, Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security, or CDBG CV CARES grant is what we're looking for. We're looking for we're applying for $9 million to do this work. The work consists of the following. Out of approximately 48,000 water service lines, the city has identified about 550, or about 1% of the lines that are definitely lead lines that need to be replaced. We expect that the cost of replacing those lead lines is about $6.6 to $9 million, and that's why we're asking for the full amount in this grant. The grant will be written in such a way so that a balance, there's around 3,200 lines where we do not yet know whether they are lead or not, and it's going to take an assessment process, which will take the better part of 1 to 2 years to confirm. The best way to confirm is by doing excavation. You don't want to do excavation for 3,200 lines if we can avoid it. So a balance of what we hope we do not need for replacing the 550 lines would go towards assessment, cameraing, etc., to be able to identify which of the remaining 3,200 lines are actually lead lines. The city is committed to replacing any lead service lines to its customers. The cost of replacing the 550 is up to $9 million. Any grant funding not spent can get us started as systematically assessing and scoping the replacement of any remaining work. DEP requires replacement of these lines at a rate of only 3% per year, which could take up to 35 or more years. This grant would eliminate all known lines within 1 to 3 years and would give us a 10-year jump start on totally eliminating the problem. Very good. Done. Done.
Any
So-
questions that may or may not be able to be heard this evening from the committee?
I'll just add that this is something that Director Campbell and I discussed at length at our last meeting. It is an opportunity for us to replace the approximately, just to recount, they were talking about 550 lead lines. It's approximately 1% of all of the lines, water lines in the city system. That would be replaced with this grant that is being funded through federal dollars. The second part is the 3,200 lines that have been identified as that we do not know for sure, but that we are going to be investigating over time. So the first phase of work, again, just recapping this, the first phase of work is to replace the known lead lines, 550. The second phase of work is to evaluate those remaining 3,200 lines. Remember that this is across our entire water system. This is not just in the city of Lancaster. And we have a question from the public. Please come to the podium. Our water system is not across the county. It serves 12 municipalities, and I can give you that information. And who are you? Thank you, Mr. Spicer.
Any other questions?
Counselor Walsh, I may have just missed it at the very beginning, but is there a timeline for this grant process?
Great question. I did not hear an answer to that.
I think this is a 5-year process, but I can confirm that. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Then I will make a motion to move Administration Resolution 58, 2022 to full council on July 12th.
Is it a 5-year grant is the question? It is, I believe it is a 5-year grant. We need to have spent it by the end of 2026.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, we had a motion there, right?
So this will be going before council next week, hoping for approval so that we can hit the deadline for the application.
So Counselor
Second.
Walsh, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you. We had a motion. We have a
Second.
And then all in favor?
Aye.
Not the last, Director Campbell, if you could speak to the proposed stormwater ordinance amendments.
Very good. So the stormwater, I'm introducing the concept. Just so that you know, for the stormwater ordinance, we are planning to present the stormwater ordinance at the committee meeting for August, and then introduce it for first reading at the council meeting for August, and then be able to go for its second reading at the council meeting in September. But I wanted to introduce what some of the proposed changes are, because I expect that members of the development community would like to be present for the August committee meeting. We will be releasing the draft of the proposed modifications to the ordinance in the last couple of weeks of July, so that there would be a minimum of 2 weeks before the council committee meeting in August for people to review it and come with their questions. Simply, and I'm going to be very brief and very simple, the intention of the proposed changes is to clarify and update, strengthen and reduce the number of requested ordinance waivers, with the goal of improving water quality and reducing combined sewer overflows and flooding. The current city's stormwater ordinance was last updated 7 years ago, and the proposed changes that we're entertaining now fall into 3 categories. 1, new references and new requirements. 2, clarifications and streamlining. 3, climate change related updates. The updated references that need to be acknowledged or wordsmithed so that they're consistent include issues related to the consent decree, which post-dated the last ordinance, the 2019 City Green Infrastructure Design Manual, which is a very good operating manual as a guidance for the developers. The 2019 update in the city's GI plan, represented in Greenock, Lancaster, and this year's Pennsylvania DEP Model Stormwater Management Ordinance. As an example, PDEP is requiring municipalities to adopt PET waste provisions for September of 2022. So if we stay on the schedule that I've described, we'll just be in time to be in compliance with PDEP's requirements for PET waste. The clarifications and streamlining are some new definitions added to improve clarity and address items such as the PET waste. Volume control clarification, there are commas, misplaced commas, or an and versus an or that need to be clarified. We have adopted a way of doing it in the past, which was not working to the best interest of the city of Lancaster. And yet we have found in dealing with most of the developers that they are willing and able to actually meet requirements if we make them clear at the beginning of the project. Exemptions were added for things like tombstones, fence posts, dog houses, things with very, very small footprints that don't have a huge impact on stormwater management. We've included additional flexibility for applicants to manage runoff from different portions of a site while still meeting the goals of the ordinance, so there's much greater flexibility than the current ordinance allows. Off-site discharge limits were clarified and additional flexibility provided for the city to address existing conveyance capacity issues and thereby better protect the health and safety of residents. And the plan submission requirements have been streamlined, including fewer paper copies, accommodating for electronic submissions, etc. Last item is climate change related updates. We have been indexed with a 100-year storm projection that was based in the year 2000. And at a 90% annual capture, as the severity of the storms increase, the city of Lancaster falls further and further behind. The city of Pittsburgh has adopted an indexing process that allowed increasing the water depth to index with the severity of the storms. So for some years it might go up, some years it might go down, but that would allow us to maintain a constant 90% of annual capture going forward. And this is something which allows us to remain to continue to let our green infrastructure be part of the basis of how we manage our stormwater, especially vis-a-vis the consent decree. In very, very general terms, those are the types of changes that are under consideration. As I say, the full redlined version of the proposed ordinance will be made available in the next couple of weeks so that people can review it before the first committee meeting in August, where we will actually present the actual changes in the ordinance, and then we'll have a first reading the following week for the first council meeting in August, and hopefully if there is any changes, we'll be able to make those changes and update them for the council meeting in September. That's stormwater for Lancaster.
And then I believe the last, any questions from the committee for Director Campbell?
If I could just, Counselor Walsh, just to add in that with this set of changes, and maybe you've noticed this, we're trying to give counselors a review of the proposed changes before we give you redline copies of ordinance changes. This has been a process that the Department of Public Works has been engaging in for several months, along with our consulting firm Jacobs. And it is time to update the ordinance from its original conception, I think in 2013 is what I recall. So that redline version is coming your way, but this is a good, Director Campbell's provided a good summary for you to know what's coming and what it is all going to mean when you look at a redline version of the ordinance.
Any other questions from council? From the public? Wonderful. So the last update we will hear from Director Campbell is the sidewalk program update.
Wonderful. This presentation will be made available to people as well as the stormwater ordinance as indicated. The next and last item is the much beloved sidewalk loan program update. So I'm going to do a very simple and very, very brief review based on some of the questions that have arisen over the course of the last few weeks and months. But I'm happy to say that this program, I think, is giving us a lot of what we were hoping for. So as a quick review, the city needs to ensure safe sidewalks. Primary focus is where we are currently paving or where there are complaints or opportunities of tripping hazards, and we need to meet city standards. A reminder, this is the way that the city of Lancaster addresses sidewalks and has addressed sidewalks for quite some time is consistent with the existing third-class city code, section 13001, which was enacted in November of 2015. Any city may, and I'm abbreviating, require owners of property abutting any street to construct, pave, curb, repave, and recurb the sidewalks and keep the sidewalks in good repair along their property. This is something that has not changed for quite some time. It is the ordinance and the code that I inherited when I arrived. The substantive change that we've done is to try to create a program that makes it much more easy for people to actually pay to do the required work. The sidewalk loan program summary allows you to perform your own work, which was always an option. Pay in full, enter the program and pay in full, and you'll get a 10% discount to do the work. Pay in full over time at the rate of $100 per month, or pay via low-interest loan program with reduced monthly payments and reduce the interest even further. If you opt into the program, the work is guaranteed to be performed to city requirements. You get a 3-year warranty, which means if there are problems, it's the city's responsibility to make the changes. We have good prices from the contractors who have been competitively bid. city manages, inspects the work, and the permitting is taken care of by the city as well. Just a quick reminder, the areas that are going to be paved during the course of 2022 and early 2023 are on the map shown. So a lot of work is going on West Lemon Street currently. There's a gas line being replaced, as well as starting in August, a water line being replaced in that area. The paving itself will start on that street later on in the year. But as you can see, there's paving going on in all four quadrants of the city. And an updated list for 2023 of what is anticipated to be paved in 2023 will be issued in the fall of 2022, so that this program, possibly with some minor adjustments, will be available for doing paving next year as well. The magnitude of the program, 700 notices were issued ahead of the 2022. Now, historically, we've issued anywhere from 250 to 300 notices per year. So this, in part, makes up for the fact that we were not issuing notices during COVID. This catches us back up with where we had hoped to be, although it is in line with some utility work, gas line work, PPL work that's being done throughout the city, and you'll give updates on the scheduling as utility work progresses. So what people may be receiving in their mail these days is notices to get their work done, and they're looking out their windows and seeing that there's still construction work going on, there's still utility work going on. In those cases, whether it's on Lemon Street, on Lime Street, on Pershing Avenue, if the schedule is changing, you will be given an updated letter with new deadlines to respond by, so that you would still be eligible for the program if you respond within those time frames. So far, the progress of the program is as such. Almost 800 notices have been sent. As I said, 700 were the target back in March. There were a number of other poor sidewalks that we became aware of. 26% of that 785 has been prepaid, meaning people have entered the program and are able to take advantage of the 10% discount. So far, about 5% of people have taken part in the loan program, and work completed outside of the program is as much as 10%, which means people chose not to opt into the program, and they are doing the work on their own with their own contractors, etc., which is fine by us. The notice of work not completed to date is approximately 60%, but of that 60%, nearly 22, almost 25% of it people have been making applications for it. So we're not falling behind. The next deadline, there's a current deadline which actually ended today, and the next deadline is the end of August. So if we get anywhere from 350 to 400 applications by the end of August, we're going to be in great shape. One of the things you're going to take notice of is that this is what the city might be in hock for in a worst case scenario if for the remaining 59% no one goes into the prepaid, the loan program, or conducts the work on their own. This is a significantly lower number than we had anticipated. We had thought that the entire program for this year would be approximately $1.5 million. We're doing better than that as it moves forward. The current progress is as such. Final notices have been sent that city will do curb work and sidewalk work, and lean property, approximately 30 properties in certain particular locations. The UGI Northeast Pod was due today, and that's the area in the upper right-hand corner. This is the area where the UGI Pod work is about to take place. Lemon, Race, Buchanan, Mill Streets, that work is due 8/31, the end of August. And then clarifications will be going out to Lemon Street and Frederick Street properties that received notices and have been impacted by UGI work and it's taking longer to do than we had anticipated. In speaking with Tiffany DeMaio, who is the key sidewalk administrative coordinator for this, she's getting a lot of good responses. People are very happy that there's actually a program to help them pay for this work that they know is their obligation as per the third class city code. And we've gotten a lot of very good response from the people who are knowledgeable about the fact that this is an unexpected thing. We know that this is an unexpected requirement for people. But over the course of the last 2 years, our sidewalks and streets have gotten in worse shape. We need to be able to be a responsible city, and the best way we believe to be responsible is when we are actually doing other street work in the streets, to be able to let that be the opportunity to improve the public right of way in those particular areas, which is the streets and the sidewalks. So are there any questions further? Preparation for next year is to continue to pave, as I had noted, to continue to assess the success of the program. We'll be making adjustments as necessary, and if successful, we may consider adding some other options. You may know that we received recently a $500,000 ARPA county level grant for our urban tree canopy continuation. It's a grant of $500,000 to work with us on trees, and that may allow us to look at permeable pavement and a variety of other things. So that's the report on the status of sidewalk program. Are there questions?
Any questions from committee members? Council as a whole? The public? All right. Well, if Director Campbell can hear us, thank you so much for the very informative presentations. And I believe that concludes the agenda items for Public Works Committee this evening.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Walsh, and thank you, Director Campbell, if you can still hear us this evening. I love technology. It's good stuff. All right, that brings us to the Finance Committee, which is me.
Thank you very, very much. Greatly appreciate it.
There we go. And Mr. Hopkins, yes, you're getting set up here. We'll give a moment to switch our technology over.
This segment will go just slightly better. There's no delay, anyway.
I would hope not. All right. So the Finance Committee has 3 items on their agenda this evening. We'll begin with Administration Resolution Number 61. This is actually authorizing funding for the aforementioned sidewalk program.
Thank you. And just ignore what you see on, well, I'll just do it that way so you can ignore what you don't see on the screen.
Great.
Administration Resolution Number 61 is, as Councilwoman Bakay said, addressing the issues that Director Campbell just talked about there with the sidewalk program. When we initially implemented the program, I believe it was in May when the first presentation was made about the program, I mentioned that we would be coming back to City Council with a request to move dollars from the Enterprise Zone Loan Fund over to the Curb and Sidewalk Fund so that we could basically address, get a little bit of experience with the program. We're a couple months in, understand sort of what the trend is in terms of property owner responses, how many people were going to be interested in taking a loan, how many people would be interested in either pursuing their own work or taking the 10% discount and making the upfront payment for the full cost of the sidewalk repairs. So while we have still close to 60% who have not responded at all, the number of people who were taking the 10% discount and paying up front was much larger than we originally anticipated. So as was shown on that one of the last slides there, when Director Campbell was showing you the figures, We believe that what's in this resolution will cover the full cost and hopefully, and then some, of any additional sidewalk work that has to be done through the remainder of 2022. Just as a little bit of history, the Enterprise Zone Loan Fund actually originated sometime during the Stork administration during the 1990s. There were state dollars that were available that were granted to the city, loaned out to businesses at the time, and the funds that remain in that fund are all repayment funds, and probably actually second or even third generation repayment funds. So there continue to be loans out of the Enterprise Zone Loan Fund, and the funds come back in. The strings that were originally attached to the grant funds from the state effectively were eliminated after the funds were loaned out and when the repayments came back in. So after the repayments come back in, then the city has the authority basically to move those dollars around, and that's what we're requesting here. So as I said, I believe it was in the email about this, we have a fund balance of about $2.7 million in the Enterprise Zone Loan Fund. There have been a host of other business loan programs that have been developed over time at the city government, county government, obviously through COVID times, and also, through a number of private funders. And so we also know, as Director Campbell said, that this sidewalk program, it's the first time that we have ever tried this to try to provide city assistance to property owners to deal with this issue. We will have to revisit this next year when we look at what that street paving program looks like, what our history is during 2022 of being able to be able to properly fund the program. As it stands right now, if the city ends up having to do a lot of the curb and sidewalk work and then lien the properties, this will not be a sustainable program because we won't have additional funding coming back in. It's a good thing, obviously, that a lot of people are taking the 10% discount. We're obviously subsidizing that to a certain extent, but they're making a payment up front, and so we have the funds available for the work. And then the loan program, depending on the amount of the loan, it could take 2, 3, 4, 5 years for repayments to come in. So again, maybe sustainable over the long term, but not over the short term that we need funding available. So this is, to a certain extent, a stopgap for this year. And then we will revisit the program, after paving season ends, see what that history is, see what tweaks we may need to the program, and see how we go forward into 2023 and beyond.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Are there any questions from members of the committee or members of council? Okay. Or the public? Then I will hear a motion to move Resolution 61 to our July 12th meeting.
So moved.
I'll take that as a motion
Second.
and a second. Thank you.
There you go.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. That takes us to our second item on the agenda, which is Resolution number 56. These are amendments to the fee schedule. Mr. Hopkins.
Okay. Thank you. So what I wanted to do is revisit a few slides from a presentation that I made to you back in February when we first addressed the Maximus fee study. And that's really just the why behind the fee study. As you remember, back in 2019, we had PFM, Public Financial Management, come in and do a 5-year review, a 5-year financial projection, and also sort of overall management review of the city. And among their recommendations were to have a fee study performed to ensure that specific service charges that we have for individual services, anything from a variety of different permits that we have for plan reviews, for building permits, and a variety of services like that, that the service charge that we have should cover the cost of the service that we're actually providing. And by doing that, what we're ensuring is that taxpayers who are not pursuing those certain services are not effectively subsidizing those services for those who are. And so, as was noted in the PFM report, service charges are paid by individual organization that benefits, service charges should be paid by the individual organization that benefits most from the service. And so we just wanted to make sure with the fee study that we were identifying all the costs that go into providing a specific service, and then measuring the fee revenue that we get from that particular, the fees for those services, and seeing whether or not there is a subsidy, or in some cases, whether or not the current fee is bringing in more revenue than it actually cost us to provide the fee. And we do have some of those circumstances also. So the sort of principles of this, as I said, fees or service charges can be charged only up to the cost of the actual, of actually performing the service provided. We're not allowed to make a profit off of a given fee. And the other thing is that for policy reasons, a municipality can decide to partially or wholly subsidize certain services by charging no fee or a reduced fee to provide a specific service at a reduced fee or no fee at all. And I'll address a few of those examples throughout this presentation. So a look at what Maximus reviewed in the fee study. They looked at every service where there is currently a fee charged. They also looked at services where no fee is charged. And this resolution right now is only dealing with modifications to fees that are currently charged. There will be a separate ordinance process that requires actually more work than I thought was required after talking with the city solicitor. And so that's a thing that will be coming. But they did review particular services where we're providing a service, we're incurring costs, but we're not actually charging a fee at this point. They looked at the number of units of services provided, and they're using 2019 actuals. We started this process in the midst of COVID. 2020 and even 2021 to a certain extent were abnormal years in terms of service provision. So what they did is went back when they talked with individual departments and bureaus, they talked to staff about the number of units of service that were provided during 2019. They looked at each step of the services that were provided, and then they looked at the salary and benefit expenses for the individuals who perform each of those steps of the process. For those numbers, they were based on the 2021 budget. So we're using 2019 numbers for units of service provided and 2021 budget for the cost of salaries and benefits for staff. A few examples. One was a reflection of a new, what would be a new charge if we were to implement this would be for the administration of handicap parking signs. And just to sort of walk you across this so you can see. So if we look at the full cost of the service in that particular circumstance, about $155,000 it costs to administer that program throughout the year. In 2019, we performed that service 382 times. If we were to recover that full $155,000, the fee for that service would be a little over $400. So this is everything from a property owner wants to have a handicap parking space in front of their property until the time that the Public Works Department actually installs those signs. That's the $400 cost. This would be the perfect example of the situation where we are making a decision to subsidize that cost. There is no way that we would be presenting you with an ordinance to implement a fee that would add a $400 cost to that service. But it is important still to know what it costs us to provide that service. The second example here is in building codes, and this is the largest single instance of a subsidy. There are quite a few different types of building permits that we issue for residential and for commercial construction. In this particular case, this is the Tier 3, which is a commercial renovation with multiple trades, so plumbing, electrical, those are the trades that are included in here, which different trades require different types of inspections. They require different types of inspections throughout a project. In this case, the full cost of providing this service, so there were 74 units of service. The full cost to provide it was $311,000. And our current building permit schedule brings in about $45,000 on those 74 building permits. So there is in effect a subsidy of about $266,000 for those large building permits, multiple trades, and lots of inspections and plan reviews. So in this case, this is a more challenging fee to determine because for a lot of fees that it's $100 for X, and the unit is the X and the $100, and you just determine we issued whatever 75 of those. We did 75 of those things at $100 a piece, and it's a very straightforward calculation on how to increase the fee to deal with the subsidy. In the case of this building permit fee, it depends on the value of the project. That's a large part of the calculation. We believe that the largest reason for the subsidy here is that in addition to the rate charged by the value of the project, is that there were also caps added for the commercial renovation. And by that, I believe it was $16,000 was the cap on the building permit fee, which meant that if you had, I'll take a $75 million project, would pay that same at the cap, whereas maybe a $25 million project would also pay at that, or pay near that. So to a certain extent, this was a subsidization of large projects like this. So you'll see in the fee schedule, I think was probably distributed late this afternoon, and that lateness is on me because I was waiting actually on one of these rates, reflects a change to both the value but also eliminating the caps for those the 3 tiers of commercial building permit fees, so that we don't have those artificial caps, and each property that is being developed or redeveloped is paying a building permit fee based on the value of the project itself. And then the third example, and this is one where there's a statutory limitation, in the police bureau, so this is a current fee for accident reports, so this is vehicle accident reports. Full cost of the service, $105,000. There were 1,221 accident reports provided during 2019. The full cost for each of those would be a little over $86, and the current fee is $15. And the reason for that is that in state law in Title 75, it limits the fee for everybody except for the city of Philadelphia at $15. So even though we can show that we have a cost of $86, the state limits us to a $15 fee. So that was the bit of background that I gave you back in February, but I just wanted to give you that as a reminder. Now I wanted to jump into some of the statistics from the fee study and then get into just a few examples. There were 279 current fees that that Maximus reviewed, and a lot of those are, probably about 50 of those are in the fire code, and there's an individual fee for very different, for sprinkler system reviews and hood systems in restaurants and a whole variety of different things. So 279 fees sounds like a whole lot, but a lot of them are lumped into one individual code. There are a whole lot of different ones in the building code, and the health code also has a number of them that they reviewed. So of those 279 fees, this resolution would modify 84 of them, or about 30%. The majority of them are increases, but there are some reductions, and I'll address a few of those. The net subsidy, if you took all of the either subsidy or where we were raising more revenue from the fee than we were spending in the services provided, if you net all of those out for those 84 fee changes, it would reflect, based on the 2021 budget, would reflect an increase in general fund revenue of about $766,000. That number is not what it will ultimately end up being, because we're basing this on 2019 services provided in 2021 budget, but it gives you a sense of the scope of the changes that are at play. And as I mentioned, that one building code change was a $266,000 subsidy. So that's almost a third of what we're looking at right here. It's just that one change alone. So again, not going to go through all 84 of the changes, but wanted to just show you a couple of examples. This is one, this plumbing, we are I believe, and Chris may know this, the only contractor that we are allowed at this point to license. We can't do we can't do electricians, we can't do just home improvement providers because those are covered by the state, but we are still able to license plumbers. For whatever reason, that is one that the state has allowed us to maintain. The Maximus review determined that while we had a $100 fee for master plumbers, $50 fee and renewal fee for journeyman plumbers, and $25 fee for apprentice plumbers, the cost of us to provide the testing and maintaining the license program is essentially the same for all of them. And so the change here would be to change the master, journeyman, and apprentice licensing and annual renewal to $25 each. Fairly obscure reference or example, but that is how the fee study worked out. In the health code for Chapter 240 for restaurants, these were the restaurant licenses are based on the number of employees. And so you can see the changes here for 1 to 2 employees. It would go from this is an annual fee, from $30 to $90. And you see those, the changes here throughout. Over 20, just so you're aware, there were no restaurants in 2019 that had over 20 employees. So this, while the fee is in there, there's effectively no impact on any business. And then for the temporary food sale permit, from $60 to $140. And again, this is based on Maximus talking primarily with Kim Whistler, the senior health officer, and understanding the whole process that goes into doing the inspections and also the licensing for these individual businesses. Another example of a reduction, the food truck license, the annual permit fee was put into place, I think, in 2015 when sort of food trucks were just starting to take off. It was set at $500 a year. The review that Maximus did said that it cost just under $90 for us to do the permitting, the inspections and the permitting for those food trucks. So that's one that we're proposing to reduce from $500 down to $90, which probably won't disappoint any of the food trucks that operate throughout the city. But there's no changes to the application fee and no change to the actual health license fee that goes along with that. Another set of changes is reflected in the subdivision and land development plan review process, and similarly in the stormwater review process. And in talking with Douglas Smith about this, this was an area where there was another significant subsidy of, and the reason for that is, and I'll use what Douglas told me about these, this category B, this land development, subdivision land development plan, where the current fee is $1,000 for a basic review, and that includes reviewing 2 plan sheets. And from what Douglas said, it's extraordinarily rare that any of those comes with only 2 plan sheets. And I'm taking from Mr. Delf's reaction that is more than extraordinarily rare. So then there is an additional fee for $200 for each additional plan sheet. And so that would be the norm, that a developer would pay $1,000 plus $200 for additional plan sheets. What happens in reality, though, is that some developers will come in and let's say they have a 20-page, 20-sheet plan. It takes the planning staff time to review that. They review it, they provide some comments to the developer, they turn those back, they get the plans back, and they're good to go. They're ready to get reviewed by the Planning Commission and go through the rest of the process. Another developer will come in, they may also have a 20-sheet plan. So by the current structure, they would pay exactly the same as that first developer. But the planning staff reviews the plan, marks it up with a bunch of corrections that need to be made to make sure that the plan complies with city code, the subdivision land development ordinance, all that sort of stuff, sends it back to the developer. They get it back from the developer with 1 out of 5 of the changes that they said need to be made, actually made. So then it takes time for the planning staff to go back through that plan. And Douglas described sometimes there are 3, 4, 5, 6 iterations of that process, which effectively is the developer using the expertise of our planning staff to get their plan in good form. And we're charging both of those developers the exact same rate. So what in the discussions I had with Douglas, and this is done in a number of other municipalities, is they do planning would do a preliminary review of what has been the scope of the plan that's been presented and make an estimate based on the number of plan sheets and their knowledge and expertise of the code, and tell the developer that they have to make a payment into an escrow that the city would hold, and then we would draw down based on an hourly billable rate that would be a combined rate for the planning staff and the engineering staff who would actually review the plan. Then we would draw down that escrow based on the amount of time that it actually takes to review the plan. So the developer who sends their plan in and has a solid plan and maybe only has to have one review, they will pay significantly less than that one who is effectively having our planning staff do their work for them. And ideally, over time, that means that the developers who have to have their plans returned them 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 times get better at that, but if they don't, they will be charged accordingly and based on the amount of time that it takes to review the plan. In talking about this with the city solicitor, what we need to have in place is, one, we have to publish what those billable rates would be. So it'd likely be a blended rate for the planning staff and a blended rate for the engineering staff, and that would encompass both their hourly rate based on their salary, but also loaded with the benefit expenses. And then we would have to have policies and procedures that are also published that would explain to developers how the escrow works. So you make your escrow deposit, we draw down on that escrow. Once the plan is reviewed and has gotten to the point of going, say, to the planning commission or whatever the end point is, then we would return the remainder of the escrow. There have to be procedures for dispute and that sort of thing, and that's something that the city solicitor can work on developing. And that gets me to a point I should have mentioned earlier on, is that in the resolution itself, we're having the effective date of these fee changes be October 1st, because that will provide us with the time to get some of the administrative issues in order to make this type of thing a reality. I mentioned the stormwater being a similar one, and in that case, there are similar type stormwater reviews that happen, I guess, as a combination of staff in stormwater division of Public Works, but also in planning. And so we would have to have rates, the same thing, rates published there for how those escrows would work. And again, policies and procedures for how to implement that escrow. So that's the last slide I have. If there are, either now or between now and the next council meeting when this would be on the agenda, if there are questions about any of the particular fees and, maybe what the subsidies were, or maybe what the additional revenue was over what our expenses were, just let me know.
Thank you, Patrick. I do have a quick question, and this may be something that will come out with more work with the city solicitor. So, understanding that stormwater is similar to a land development plan in some ways, but there are also very small stormwater permits.
Thank you.
Is there a way that we could exempt a project like that from the escrow if we implement that?
Yes, I should have mentioned that when I was talking about stormwater. So there is, in 2020, I believe, there was a fee implemented for a small stormwater plan, and that was $30. And those are probably without exception all residential property stormwater plans that have to be done. That fee was implemented at $30 per plan review, and what we're proposing with this is no change to that. So in effect, there was, I believe the number was about a $16,000 subsidy for that. But in talking with Douglas, we thought that that made sense to continue that. These are, individual property owners. We don't want to disincentivize people from coming and actually getting stormwater plan reviews for work that they do in their property. So it made sense to maintain that fee at $30.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the committee? Or from members of council? Or from the public? Then, hearing none, I would like to make a motion that we move this forward to what would be the August 9th meeting of council, the first regular meeting in the month of August.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And that takes us to Administration Bill number 14, and this is appropriating funds for capital projects.
Okay. So what I've put up on the screen is the Exhibit A that's referenced in this ordinance. As you remember, back in March, I believe it was, you approved a supplemental appropriation ordinance for a particular set of capital projects that required funding into this summer. We funded that with cash flow that we had on hand. There was an associated tax and revenue anticipation note that helped to fill that hole as we funded those capital projects. The timing that we're now looking at doing the bond issue is bringing that to City Council in September with a current plan to have the final approval and the auction on that at the first meeting in October, which would allow us to close by about the first or second week of November and have bond proceeds in hand. So what we did is went back to Department of Public Works and said, okay, so we had the $10 million of projects authorized by City Council. That concept was to bring us into the summer. Now that we're looking at that time period of getting bond proceeds in November, are there additional projects that council didn't already authorize, and or are there projects where council authorized a particular amount, but there's more needed to get us through until when we have the bond issue actually completed and we have bond proceeds in hand? So if I can use this first one as an example, Milburn Park, these are internal accounting numbers you can sort of ignore. The original approval in ordinance number 5 was for $350,000 of expenses to go into Milburn Park. What DPW has provided is that they need authority for an additional $175,000 to get us through to that point where we have bond proceeds in hand. Parks Master Plan, Conestoga Pines Master Plan, Beaver Street Pocket Park, the funding that City Council has already approved is sufficient. And then we have the facility condition assessments for facilities that are within parks and public property within the general fund. You had already authorized $20,000, and this would be authorizing an additional $30,000. So that's sort of the structure of this exhibit. So and the reason we need to do this with a supplemental appropriation is that City Council needs to both authorize the project, but then also has to authorize the funding for that project. So you authorized a set of projects with ordinance number 5. This is another set of projects and/or project funding budgets for in bill number 14. And then when we have the bond issue completed and we have bond proceeds in hand, you also adopted what's called a reimbursement resolution in March, and that says that we can use proceeds of a future bond issue to reimburse ourselves for costs that we incurred prior to the issuance of the bonds. And so in September, we'd be coming back to you then with a full capital project list that would include all of the projects that you see on this exhibit, plus some additional ones that are really projects planned to be taken under, to start either way late in 2022 or more likely in 2023.
Thank you.
That is it.
I had one question. So this goes back to we previously approved the the tax revenue
Tax revenue
anticipation note.
anticipation note.
So what is the status of that? Is that it is repaid at this point, or are we've worked through those funds, but it's still outstanding?
So, as of Friday, we had expended about 30% of the proceeds from that. Let me go to the bottom line here, just to use this as an example. So, $10 million was what was authorized previously. What is the total for this authorization is an additional 6.5 million. In theory, we'd have the authorization from council to spend up to $16.5 million before we do the bond issue. The reality is that that's not going to happen. There are projects that were begun in 2022, but most of the effort of the project is probably going to be in 2023. There are projects that we anticipated to start this year that probably are just going to get delayed until next year. That said, we have to have council, we need the flexibility, and we have to have council authority to actually spend money, have a particular project and spend money on that particular project. So I guess what I would call the 16.5 million would be the absolute worst case scenario, in that every single dollar for all of these projects that's authorized gets spent before we have bond proceeds in hand, and I just don't absolutely see that happening at all.
3 months' time. Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? Or members of council? Or from the public? Great, then I will hear a motion to move Administration Bill number 14 to our next meeting on July 12th.
I'll make a motion to move to bill number 14 to the 12th.
I heard a motion, I heard another motion, but I'll take that as a second if that's okay with you. Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And that'll be a first read, just as a
Yes,
point of
correct.
clarification.
Thank
Thank you. All right, that concludes the finance.
I'm sorry, question, Madam Vice President. The previous resolution, you had put that on the
August
for
9th.
August 9th.
Correct.
Okay. In order to do that, I'm going to be renumbering, and Resolution 61 will become 56, since we're doing those in numerical order.
So those two will flip-flop
Yeah, and then I'll switch those numbers, and 61 then will be on the August agenda.
for everyone playing along at home. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. All right, that concludes the finance, oh, no, it
I'm
doesn't.
sorry, I forgot to also say this when we were talking about the fees. One area on that Exhibit A with the fee resolution that you won't see is in property maintenance and rental housing. There were a whole host of changes there that were recommended by Maximus. James Nixon, who heads up the rental property and code enforcement efforts, reviewed that. He had some further recommendations. Rather than put fee changes in front of you now, when there is also a rewrite of that part of the code coming to you, I believe in October, the idea was to try to incorporate the recommendations that basically both Maximus and Mr. Nixon had into that rental housing ordinance, because that ordinance includes, specifically cites a bunch of the individual fees that go along with rental licensing, inspections, re-inspections, that sort of thing.
Okay. Thank you for that context. And that concludes the Finance Committee meeting this evening. I will turn it over to Councilor Diaz for Public Safety.
Thank you, Vice President. Public Safety Committee comes to order, and at this time, we have resolution number 60, 2022. It is consenting to the appointment of Captain Morales to be chief, or to be appointed as chief. And I am not sure if the chief is there to speak of it, or if Mayor Sirachi would like to address.
Thank you, Councilor Diaz. I can address. This is a resolution to approve the appointment of Richard L. Mendez as chief to the city of Lancaster. I believe that each of the council members have had an opportunity to sit down with the acting chief and have a conversation with him about, I'm sure you've covered lots of topics, but to recap, Acting Chief Mendez has served the city of Lancaster for 20-plus years. He began as all police officers do, in patrol, and has worked his way up through the ranks. He is a J.P. McCaskey graduate. He grew up on South Queen Street and has lived in the city of Lancaster for his entire life, excluding the last 8 months. He has a wife and 2 kids, and yes, I think that's what I want to say. Happy to take any comments from city councilors if you would like to add anything.
Does anybody in the committee have any questions?
Councilor Diaz, if I may.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you. No questions, just a comment. I had the opportunity to sit down with Interim Chief Mendez, and very excited for the future of the department and the city of Lancaster, and personally also excited that J.P. McCaskey grad will be taking the helm of the police department. So very excited if this moves forward to be working with Chief Mendez in our community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from full council?
Councilor Diaz, this is Councilor Bakay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment, also echo that I share in your excitement for that. I had a really great conversation with Acting Chief Mendez, and I think that I have the amount of folks that have come out to talk to me in support of his appointment to be a chief of police is encouraging. And I've heard from a lot of folks inside and outside of the police about his character. And so this is an exciting appointment.
Councilor Diaz, this is Councilor Craig.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you. I will echo what my colleagues have said thus far, and I'm excited for Interim Captain Mendez to take charge of his office, and look forward to all of the input that he will have in the city as far as being a community activist and just overall good person to sit down and have a conversation with. Thank you.
And does anybody in the public have any comments, like Tim?
He says no, thank you.
Okay. Since there is no additional comments, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to move this to July 12th to full council.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That concludes the Safety Committee.
Thank you very much, Councilor Diaz.
you.
That moves us to Economic Development Committee. Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I have a brief update regarding the American Rescue Plan, the ARPA funds, and the housing RFP. On June 27th, the City of Lancaster issued a request for proposals for affordable housing solutions with the American Rescue Plan Act funds. The city is looking for not-for-profit companies, real estate developers, and other community partners interested in increasing the number and quality of affordable housing units within the city of Lancaster using ARPA funds. Proposals will be accepted via the PA Electronic Document and Bid Management website, which is www.penbid.net. through 11 a.m. on August 22nd. All this information can be found on the press release that was issued by the city. And also want to send a special thank you for the city staff that have worked very hard in putting together this request for proposal and ensuring that it's transparent, holds the city accountable, but then also meets the mission of the city in creating affordable housing. So that concludes my update.
Thank you very much, Councilor Arroyo. Are there any questions on that from members of council or members of the public? Great. Thank you very much. I'm eager to hear additional updates. All right, that takes us, then there's no committee of the whole this evening, so that takes us to the report of the clerk. Mr. Harris.
Yes, Madam Vice President. Excuse me, Councilor, just so in the last month, I researched the resolution condemning gun violence and helped prepare the one for Juneteenth, both of which you passed last month. I responded to a request for a solid waste management ordinance from a researcher, provided ordinances for city staff, prepared a quarterly review of board, commission, and authority members whose terms will soon expire or where there are vacant positions. I prepared a list of new board, commission, and authority appointees and those who have previously participated who have not previously participated in orientation training for the next orientation session that we'll be holding here on Thursday. I contacted them and invited to the virtual training. I attended the Parking Authority meeting and provided you a summary of that discussion. I requested corrections to the city's website to indicate that we're only holding one regular meeting in the summer months. I notarized some DEP applications for city staff, registered counselor for a conference, and attended the initial meeting of an EV charging working group with the Parking Authority. Had a very interesting discussion with that. I also began the process of updating the city clerk manual, which is a manual that lives in my office, and in case I ever got hit by a bus or something, would be there that somebody would be able to grab. That's what I've been working on this month.
Thank you very much. Well, we don't want that to happen, and I'm sure there's countless other duties that you do, so I just wanted to take a moment and tell you thank you for all that you do for us. That takes us, that's actually the end of our agenda, so if there's nothing further, I will hear a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.